Good evening. 4 days ago, over in Australia, new government data was released, which showed that despite them having some of the most draconian vaccine mandates in the entire world, well, at this very moment, there are more fully vaccinated patients who are hospitalized with COVID compared to the number of unvaccinated patients. Meanwhile, right here in America, according to new death certificate data which came out of the CDC, it showed that the number of deaths among people aged between 18 and 49, basically people who are in the prime of their lives, it increased by more than 40%. And the kicker is that the majority of these excess deaths are not coming from COVID. And then lastly, 2 days ago, an obscure agency within the Biden administration, they announced that they will be compiling a database of all federal employees who have had religious objections to the vaccine. And within this database, they will be collecting and storing the names as well as the personal religious information of those who chose to object. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion over in Australia. So in case you're not aware, Australia is broken up into 8 different states. And New South Wales, you can see it right there on the map, the most populous state in the country. Close to 30% of all Australians live in New South Wales. And according to new data, which just came out a few days ago, despite Australia having some of the most draconian vaccine mandates in the entire world, at this very moment, in New South Wales, there are more fully vaccinated patients who are hospitalized with COVID compared to the number of unvaccinated patients. Specifically, according to new data that was just published by the New South Wales government COVID Critical Intelligence Unit, as of 4 days ago, 68.9% of those hospitalized with COVID already had 2 doses of the vaccine, while only 28.8% were unvaccinated. Furthermore, if you dig further into the data that they released and look at the patients who are in the ICU, then you'll find that those who are fully vaccinated are likewise the majority, with 50.3% of the patients being fully vaccinated and 49.1% being unvaccinated. And so this rise in proportion of the hospitalizations among the fully vaccinated comes amidst 2 dual factors. The first is the loss of efficacy among the vaccines which are currently available, and then the second factor is the spread of the Omicron variant of the virus. In fact, take a look at this chart here. The 2 green lines at the top, they represent those who are unvaccinated, whereas the yellow and orange lines at the bottom, they represent those who are vaccinated. And this chart, it clearly shows that when Australia entered the period of Omicron prevalence, well, that corresponded neatly to the percentage of fully vaccinated people being hospitalized more and more. You can see it right there, it's just shooting right up. Whereas during that same time period, the prevalence of unvaccinated individuals entering the hospital or the ICU, it dropped down precipitously. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to the health department of the New South Wales government, and they got back to us, telling us that the Omicron variant has now supplanted Delta as the primary variant that's spreading in their state. And they also said that Omicron appears to be less dangerous than Delta, even though it is more contagious. Here's specifically what their spokesperson said to us via email. The Omicron variant is associated with a lower rate of hospitalization and ICU admission. And what he said here does appear to be true, because when you look at the actual numbers as a percentage, here's what you find. New South Wales recorded 32,155 cases of the virus on January the 9th, with 2,030 being hospitalized and only 159 having to be sent to the ICU. Then, as of January the 12th, as the Omicron variant spread more and more, the total number of cases almost doubled to 53,909. However, the hospitalization numbers, they actually moved very little, with there being only 2,242 people being hospitalized and 175 admitted to the ICU. However, that does not paint the full picture, because according to the other chart that we examined, it was clear that with the onset of Omicron, the composition of the people who are actually being hospitalized shifted dramatically to having people who are fully vaccinated make up the majority. And while the spokesperson for the New South Wales government, he didn't address that question directly, he did encourage more people to get the booster shot. Here's specifically what he told to us via email. We continue to encourage everyone who has not yet done so to get vaccinated and anyone who is now eligible for their booster dose to get it without delay. The COVID-19 vaccines available in Australia are safe and very effective at reducing the risk of serious illness and death. Now, you might look at that statement from him and think that this advice actually seems to fly in the face of the data that we've been looking at. However, if you do take a step back and look at New South Wales as a whole, you would find that about 80% of the people who are age 60 and older are fully vaccinated, and about 20% are not vaccinated. Meaning that if 80% of the population is fully vaccinated, but they only make up about 69% of those in the hospital, well, they are technically underrepresented, which would be an indication that the vaccines offer a level of protection against being hospitalized. Although again, the spokesperson did not give us any comment on why specifically that level of protection has been waning more and more. And why is it that the obvious trend that we're seeing, according to that chart that we looked at earlier, is that the fully vaccinated people are making up more and more of the percentage of those who are hospitalized? And by the way, it's not only in Australia, because we are seeing a similar trend play out right here in America as well. For instance, here in New York City, where we film this program, newly released data shows that breakthrough infections are surging amidst the spread of the Omicron variant. Specifically, over the course of the month of December, the daily rate of new COVID infections per fully vaccinated New Yorkers grew by more than sevenfold, going from 29.8 new cases per 100,000 fully vaccinated people in the first week of the month, all the way up to 223.3 new cases per 100,000 in the final week of the month. Although, looking at the state data as a whole, it also indicates that the risk of infection is far greater for those who are unvaccinated. You can see that's the blue line in the middle of that chart. However, if we dig a bit deeper into these numbers, they also show that, for one, that while the Omicron variant spreads more easily, it is generally more mild in terms of symptoms, and that secondly, because of that, we are seeing that more people who are hospitalized, they are actually coming into the hospital for reasons other than COVID. But then they just happen to test positive for COVID while they're there. We saw that, for instance, in recent data that came out of New York last week. And also, now we are seeing the same data over in New Jersey, which just had new data come out of the state and show that less than half of those who were hospitalized with COVID were actually admitted for COVID, meaning that they were admitted to the hospital for something else, maybe appendicitis or a broken ankle, and then while they're at the hospital, they happen to test positive for the virus. And so it appears that there is a silver lining to everything. Regardless, though, if we circle back to what's happening in Australia, well, they are now beginning to mandate booster shots to many of their business sectors, including now all those who are involved in education, such as teachers, administrators, etc. And of course, the reason that this is important is that living here in America, I don't know about you, but I've been keeping one eye on Australia for a while now, because it seems that a lot of the methods that they're using over there seem to eventually be the same methods that get incorporated here in America, such as vaccine mandates, mask mandates, lockdowns, vaccine passports, etc. And so perhaps, just like them, we will soon have booster mandates as well. We are, frankly, already starting to see the writing on the wall on that front. I guess only time will tell. Regardless, if you'd like to read more about what's happening over in Australia or about what's happening with the hospitalizations here in America as well, I'll throw all the links to that data into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, before we move on over and discuss the strange surge in the number of deaths among Americans who are in the prime of their lives, I would like to take a quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, and I will do so from the sound booth. That's right, Roman. The sponsor of today's episode is an awesome company called AMAC. That's AMAC, and it stands for the Association of Mature American Citizens. Now, what I learned earlier today, though, is that you don't actually need to be a mature American citizen yourself in order to join AMAC, because even though they're an organization that's geared towards people who are 50 years of age and above, you can actually join at any age as long as you're a American-loving patriot. And so what they say is that as our fundamental freedoms here in this country are being threatened by politicians who don't even necessarily know how to balance their own checking accounts, and as there is a concerted effort to censor conservatives by this woke ideology, one thing that you can do to fight back is to join the 2 million people who are already members of AMAC. And by joining, you'll have access to 3 main benefits. The first benefit is the money-saving benefit, because by joining, you'll have access to discounts on things like vitamins, restaurants, retail shops throughout the entire country. Second of all, you will gain access to the AMAC website, the AMAC app, as well as the AMAC magazine, which gives you something that the mainstream media doesn't, which is honest news that is grounded in facts. And third of all, and this is what a lot of people say is their favorite benefit, is that AMAC has your back over on Capitol Hill. Because with 2 million freedom-loving members, they are a voice for conservatives that cannot be ignored. And so if you are a person who considers themselves a constitutional conservative, then I would consider joining AMAC. You can do so over at amac.us. That's amac.us. So consider signing up, consider helping AMAC's effort, and getting access to these excellent membership benefits. So AMAC, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over and talk about the surge in national deaths. According to new death certificate data, which just came out of the CDC, it showed that the number of deaths among people aged 18 to 49 increased by more than 40% in the 12-month period, which ended in October of 2021. Meaning that when you look at the number of deaths among people who are aged 18 to 49, which for your reference is called the prime age mortality, and you look at that number between October of 2020 through October of 2021, and then you compare that prime age mortality to the years 2018 to 2019, then you see a dramatic 40% increase. Meaning that last year, 40% more people who were in the prime of their lives died as compared to before the year 2020. Now, you might look at that data and say, you know what, Roman, that is sad. However, it's obvious why that is. I mean, we are, of course, in the middle of the COVID pandemic. However, this is where things get a little murky, because this data came from combining the numbers in all 50 states. And in none of the states was COVID reported in more than 60% of these excess deaths. For instance, let's take a look at some of the examples. Nevada was the worst in the nation with a 65% prime age mortality surge. However, only 36% of that surge was attributed to COVID, meaning that there was a 65% increase in the number of deaths, and out of all those excess deaths, only 36% of them were attributable to COVID. Then the next on the list was Texas. It was second highest in the nation with a 61% jump, of which 58% was attributed to COVID. Arizona and Tennessee both had a 57% increase, with 37% and 33% being attributed to COVID, respectively. And then you had California with a 55% increase, of which 42% was attributed to COVID, followed by New Mexico, Florida, and Louisiana. All right, so I've been digging through this CDC data, and there is some things we can glean from it. However, it is worth noting that the CDC has not released the full breadth of this excess death data for the year 2021. So far, they've only released it for COVID, pneumonia, as well as influenza. All the other causes have, for some reason or other, have yet to be released. So let's go through it. So there were close to 6,000 excess pneumonia deaths for this age group, for people between the ages of 18 to 49. So these are pneumonia deaths that did not involve COVID, and there were 6,000 of them. In terms of influenza, there were only 50 deaths in this age group, down from 550 in the period before the pandemic. So 50 is almost negligible. And then what's interesting to note is that flu deaths actually didn't count because what's interesting is that the CDC, this is what they said, quote, "The flu death count did not exclude those that also involved COVID or pneumonia." So that is quite interesting in and of itself, the fact that flu deaths are bundled into pneumonia and COVID deaths. Take that to mean whatever you want it to mean. Now, what's interesting to note, and this is something that really does not get as much media attention as it should, except for the odd report that comes out of, let's say, the Border Patrol Agency, is that here's what this article says, quote, "Overall, a part of the surge could be likely blamed on drug overdoses, which increased to more than 101,000 in the 12 months ending June 2021 from about 72,000 in 2019, according to CDC estimates. About 2/3 of those deaths involved synthetic opioids, including fentanyl, that are often smuggled into the United States from China through Mexico." And so now I believe that this is exactly where everything begins to tie together, because okay, for instance, the drugs, especially the fentanyl, a lot of it is flowing through our open southern border from Mexico into America. So you have the open border policy that's contributing to these deaths. Likewise, a lot of people turned to drugs after the lockdowns. They didn't have anything to do. Economic prosperity pretty much evaporated here in America. And so a lot of people, unfortunately, turned to drugs. And with the prevalence of fentanyl supplanting even heroin in this country, and fentanyl is extremely deadly, even a tiny pinch of it can cause death. And a lot of it flowing through Mexico. It all ties together. And another factor that you can't ignore is the fact that a lot of this fentanyl, it originates in China, goes to Mexico, and flows into America. And that is actually part of China's, well, rather the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare doctrine. So they actually use this form of drug warfare to hurt America. It's in a phenomenal book that was published by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. It's called Unrestricted Warfare, and in that book, they have drug warfare as one of the arenas that you can destabilize a country like the United States. So it's not like I'm making it up here. It is in fact something that they're using. And unfortunately, it looks like they are succeeding. Now, one thing that's not mentioned in this report, but I believe that when the full data will come out, this will be a large contributing factor to these excess deaths, and that is the large number of suicides that have been occurring in this country, specifically between people aged 18 to 49 years old, because we've had sort of anecdotal data from individual cities and individual towns showing that the rate of suicide is increasing, and it's pretty much skyrocketed during the pandemic. And you can imagine why, because of the lockdowns, because of people just sitting at home, not having anything to do. Depression levels spiked. And so those are the contributing factors. You have opioid deaths, you have suicides, and of course you have pneumonia. It'd be interesting to look into why exactly pneumonia was such a large contributing factor. Perhaps when the full CDC data comes out for the year 2021, they will provide some context for that. Now, in this CDC report, besides the prime age mortality, they also had reports for other age groups as well. So, for instance, for those aged 50 to 84, mortality also went up by about a factor of 27%, representing more than 470,000 excess deaths. However, for them, almost 4 out of 5 of these deaths had COVID marked on the death certificate as either the cause or the contributing factor. And then another age category in this report was people who are aged 85 or older, and the mortality for them increased about 12%, with more than 100,000 excess deaths. However, in total for that group, 130,000 deaths were related to COVID. And so what this data indicates is that when you hit 50 and above, the excess deaths here could be largely attributed to COVID, while for people aged 18 to 49, these excess deaths are attributable to things other than COVID. You have opioid deaths, likely suicide, pneumonia, as well as other causes. Well, with COVID being one of them, but not the major cause. So there you have it. Again, we will do an update to this report once the full breadth of data comes out from the CDC for the year 2021. And until that happens, Roman in the studio, back to you. If you'd like to read more about this analysis, including all the data regarding this giant surge in prime age mortality, I'll throw all that data into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, take a quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, let's move on over and talk about religious freedom, or rather, perhaps the lack of religious freedom. 2 days ago, an obscure agency within the Biden administration, they announced that they will be compiling a database of all federal employees who had religious objections to the vaccine. Let me just repeat that. An obscure agency, something called the Pretrial Services Agency, they announced on Tuesday that they will begin to collect and store the names as well as the personal religious information of those who objected to the vaccine mandate. Here's specifically what they wrote as a part of their announcement statement. The Pretrial Services Agency for the District of Columbia is issuing a public notice of its intent to create the Employee Religious Exception Request Information System. This system of records maintains personal religious information collected in response to religious accommodation requests for religious exemption from the federally mandated vaccination requirement in the context of a public health emergency or similar health and safety incident. Furthermore, here is what it says within the Federal Register, quote, "The primary purpose of the secured electronic file repository is to collect, maintain, use, and, to the extent appropriate and necessary, disseminate employee religious exemption request information collected by the agency in the context of the federally mandated COVID-19 vaccination requirement." Now, what's really interesting to note here is that the announcement does not actually explain why the agency needs to create this list, except by saying that it will, quote, "assist the agency in the collecting, storing, dissemination, and disposal of employee religious exemption request information collected and maintained by the agency." In other words, the list that they are compiling will help the agency to make a list. Furthermore, the announcement doesn't say what the agency will actually do with this information after it has decided on a person's religious accommodation request, meaning that if the request is granted, does their personal religious information stay on this database forever? Well, thus far, it's not clear. Also, according to analysis from the Daily Signal, which is the publication that initially broke this story, they suggest that the Biden administration is using this tiny agency as a testbed for deploying this type of database across the entire U.S. government, which they say would explain why the announcement about this agency was relegated to such an obscure group, and also why the public was only given just 30 days for public comment. Now, online, some cynical people are comparing this database to what happened over in communist China under the Let 1,000 Flowers Bloom campaign. And in case you've never heard of it, the Let 1,000 Flowers Bloom campaign, it was a political trick that was instigated by Mao Zedong over in the 1950s. And the way that this trick played out was that Mao Zedong told all the people and scholars in China that he was looking for criticism of the Communist Party. He told all the people, all the professors, the military, the intellectuals all throughout China that they can criticize the Chinese Communist Party in order to make it better. And so what happened was that the people throughout China, they wrote articles and they wrote essays which gave feedback to the communists, telling them where they can do better. In fact, a lot of those essays, they were actually pro-communist. They were just giving suggestions about reform that the Communist Party can do to make itself better. However, you can pretty much guess what happened. Instead of implementing those changes, Mao Zedong, he turned around and he instead persecuted those people who dared to criticize the Chinese Communist Party. They were labeled as rightists, as counter-revolutionaries, and the criticisms that they wrote about the Communist Party, the same criticisms that Mao Zedong himself invited them to write, well, they were used as evidence against them, as proof that their thoughts were not politically correct. And so that's exactly why people right now are comparing this system that's being built, this database, to this campaign by Mao Zedong. Because while the current administration might not do anything like that, well, in the future, if such a list exists, well, who's to say it won't be used to target individuals based on their religious information, which apparently will now be sitting in some government database. Regardless, if you'd like to read more about this database for yourself or about this pretrial services agency at all, because I've personally never heard of it myself, well, I'll throw a link to an article about it as well as the official announcement. It'll all be down there in the description box below this video for you to peruse for yourself. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, take a quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, since you've completed this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly recommend that you check out our new Clips channel. It's called Facts Matter Clips, where we take all of our episodes and we clip each segment and we publish it there as an individual video. You can use those videos to share with your friends and family much more easier. I'll throw a link to the Clips channel. It'll be right there at the very top of the description box. I hope you click on it. I hope you subscribe. And I hope that you share those videos to your friends and family, letting the truth be known far and wide. Lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also consider hitting that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we release them. And then lastly, if you happen to have a Telegram account, consider following us at FactsMatter_Roman. We'll publish the links to all of our episodes. So in case anything ever happens here on YouTube, you can always find the links to our episodes on Telegram. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.